Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to all of you out there in the land of the living. My name is Lesley Southwick-Trask, and I'm here on behalf of Jim Garrison today. This is day 370, and I know some of you are celebrating the fact that you have been virtually on all of these wonderful moments in time that we share. Just on this week alone, on Monday, we had Roger Hallam, who told us how we needed to take to the street and stand for what it is that we must have in this time of climate crisis. Yesterday, we went and explored what social innovation can feel like and be like in a truly wonderful interactive session. And I want to thank all of you who participated in an engaged fashion, how much it felt for us that we were with you, even though this is a screen and we saw you on typing away. It was in fact a beautiful moment of feeling with you. Today is yet another amazing experience. Today, though, we're going to be experiencing ourselves in the highest frequency we can have, that of gratitude. In the frequency work we're going to be doing, it's going to be allowing us to tap in to our ancestors and tap into the frequency that is holding deep gratitude for all that we have. You know, about a year ago, I did an amazing constellation work with Diana Clare. And I was taken to the constellation of my grandfathers, two humans in human form I had never met. They had died before my birth. And yet I was taken to 800 AD, where I was sitting with them in the Middle East in a tent. And they were passing to me a family secret. I have continued to uncover what that family secret was. I knew they handed it to me. I felt their presence. Their energetic beings were with me. And I felt for once in my life, I knew them. That's what time is. There is no such thing as time. Time is man-made. We can travel to moments in other constellations with an open heart and an open mind and an open spirit. All that we need is already here. It's how do we access it so that we can stay in the frequency that allows us to see our path forward with clarity and with love. So today's meditation is going to be slightly different. Although you'll hear the same music, we are going to open the field for our ancestors to come. I'm going to begin the opening of the field, and then I'm going to be delightfully joined by Barbara, a clan grandmother, who's going to further the opening of the field for all of us. In order to do this, you need to be very relaxed and non-expectant. Those who show up because they're meant to show up. You can't plan them in. You can't cognitize, I want so-and-so. Allow them to come. Allow them to be with you. Allow them to be with you throughout these next 90 minutes so that their instruction can be your instruction. So take a very deep breath in through the nose and out through the mouth. Relax every part of you. Allow yourself to open at the crown, to open at the heart, to open at your feet, allowing your connection with Mother Earth. Allow all of you to be in this moment open. Welcome into the frequency of trust. I'm coming to you today from the original territory of the Nitstapi, the Blackfoot Confederacy, and the Treaty 7 peoples. This is an opportunity for us to cast our mind back 400 years ago. In 400 years ago, when the Pilgrims arrived into the US of A and met with the indigenous leaders who were there as they arrived, there was a very important meeting that took place 400 years ago, 1621. It's important to recognize that in that time, there was also a great pandemic that had wiped out the indigenous, half of the indigenous and half of the pilgrims that had already traveled. It was a time of great change, much like what we find ourselves in today. There are parallels in 1621 that we want to explore in 2021. To help us understand what that meeting was about in 1621 in Plymouth, we have with us some wonderful people who not only can speak to this from their studies and their experience, but through their blood. The first person I want to introduce you to is Mary, and Mary can join us now. Barbara Mary Kurfis. Sorry, Barbara. Barbara is the clan grandmother of the Pokanoket, and she walks in two worlds. Her native name is Wamsutta. She's descended from the Quadaquina, the brother of the Massasoit, the great sachem of the Pokanoket. However, Barbara's really unusual in so many different ways, as you will find out, because she is also descended from Stephen Hopkins, a Mayflower Pilgrim. And both of these ancestors attended the 3-day harvest celebration in 1621. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you.
So glad you're here, and you're going to be bringing us into the opening of the field in just a moment. And I'm so excited to be in your energy frequency. You make me so happy. I want to introduce now to you Dr. Betty Booth Donohue. She is of the Cherokee Nation. She is an independent scholar who lives in Oklahoma, and she's been the author of the Bradford Indian book, Being the True Root and Rise of American Letters, as revealed by the native text embedded in the of Plymouth plantation. And so Barbara has published many works on the Indigenous American oral traditions and on 19th century Native poetry. So Barbara's joining us as a scholar and also as someone who brings with her the Indigenous wisdom. Joining us is now Andrew Cameron Bailey and Connie Baxter Marlow. You know them well from their times already on Humanity Rising. They're authors, filmmakers, and futurists who continue to bring us this uplifting vision of the world that humanity has right here in its possibility. You might know them from their book, The Trust Frequency, and In Search of the Future, their film. I think the thing that really fascinates me both about Andrew and Connie is their 50 years, the first 50 years project. And there they discuss the conclusions and discoveries from many years that they've spent with Indigenous elders and their research into the Pilgrim story. You know, history has very interesting ways of presenting itself, and it's done through oral tradition in more ways than one. And yet, when you dig deep, there are written records that present themselves to tell us not only what was occurring, but what was being experienced in the language that they use. And we're going to be so delighted to be inside those texts today as we travel back to 1621 to understand what took place in the gathering on that day and what meeting of the Indigenous, the Native American, and the Pilgrim in that moment in time. They celebrated gratitude, as you are going to in North America and the US celebrate tomorrow. And such is the nature of the timing of this session, for us to be ready for Thanksgiving tomorrow. So I want to thank all of you for joining us and for being here. I do want to say one quick thing. Andrew also has written an incredible novel. It's a mystery and it's a screenplay, the Mayflower Revelations. And it looks at the intercultural friendship in the Plymouth plantation. And I've read episodes of it and it's just a delight. I feel like I'm there with the characters as they experience that moment in time. So one other mention that Connie is herself a Mayflower Pilgrim descendant. And so as we sit with these wise elders, we sit not only with their well scholarly developed research, but also with their lineage that is speaking through them today. So I'm going to now ask each of you for your introduction in your words. And my question is, what is it that from your ancestors is the message that is coming through into your heart right now? The message from your ancestors that's coming into your heart right now that you wish to share with our audience. I am going to start with you, Barbara. What's your message?
Taniska, that means hello. The message is coming together in love, in unity, in peace, in joy, in happiness for this day.
Oh, what a wonderful message. Thank you. Betty, what's your message?
My message is that natives, which I will call Indians, are with us. They've been with us since the very beginning, and they've totally changed us, although we don't recognize it. So my passion is to bring this understanding to all people so that they really understand that they're indebted to natives and that they replicate natives. Every time they pick up a coffee or light a cigarette, they're Indian.
Thank you. Thanks, Betty. Andrew.
So in the sense that we are all indigenous, I'm feeling back to my indigenous ancestors back in what is presently called Europe. Way pre-Viking, back in those early European days, I am still connected to those roots by my blood, by my spirit. And somehow I was drawn across the Atlantic in 1969 and arrived on these shores exactly 52 years ago today, which is interesting. So I sailed across on a sailboat, the wind blew me here. I call myself a latter-day pilgrim. I showed up finally.
Oh, and Connie would say none too soon, but you know, I mean, that is, well, happy anniversary to the arrival.
Seriously.
Absolutely. And we're so delighted. So yay, Connie.
Well, I would have to say that my work on this planet is an ancestral mandate. I'm very aware that my ancestors are speaking through me because of their dedication to this vision of the United States of America, okay? The promise that United States made to the world of liberty, justice, equality, and abundance for all. My ancestors not only came on the Mayflower with the vision of us being able to have true freedom of acting according to our conscience, which is very native. And so through my life experiences, I saw the alignment with the native people, the spiritual alignment. And my recent ancestors were historians of early New England history, my great-great-grandfather. So it's really more recent than 400 years ago that he saw the importance of these founding vision, these seeds that were planted in New England. So we're all here to bring all this forth together.
Amazing. And who showed up in my constellation was my granddaughter's future self. And so she came in as a guide. I've known her many times in many lifetimes. And so she showed up in saying, hold the sacred in this moment so that we can learn what we must learn in this moment. So we have some wonderful messages that we're coming into this conversation with. I want to now turn it over to Barbara to open us up, the further the field that we can, in fact, hold this higher energetic frequency that we may understand and interact at a level of knowing. Barbara.
Yes. My native name is Wamsutta. It means loving heart. I walk in the two worlds, as you already spoke about. So my heart is with both, with everyone. And I think that's a really good blessing for someone to have, is what I'm grateful for my heritage on both sides, all sides. I'm a descendant from Massasoit's brother, who is Quadaquina, and also from Stephen Hopkins. And with that, I'm just so delighted that we're going to do this today together. To hopefully people will see the truth and the true meaning of what happened in the beginning, and hopefully we can put a rest to the unsettledness that's going on in the world today, that we can all come together. That's it, except for when you're ready for prayer and ceremony.
So as we enter into the prayer and ceremony, what is it that we need to understand about ceremony, Barbara? Because I understand that ceremony in my world is very important as a way for us to come together and acknowledge whatever we're in ceremony about. So what is the role that ceremony plays in your world?
In my world, we call in the Creator to open up our minds, our eyes, our ears, our mouth, and our heart, that we can think good thoughts, see good things, hear what we need to hear the goodness, and speak of goodness from the heart, and the heartfelt feelings of love and warmth for humanity and each other. We do, I'm gonna show you how we do this. We do this through a smudging ceremony. I have to do this quick so it won't set off my fire alarm.
Modern reality.
Okay, we pray to the north because that's where the Creator sits, in the north. So this is sage. We use sage, tobacco, sweetgrass, and we put other things in there depending on what it is. But it's a cleansing. It cleanses the area around you. It cleanses. We purify each other by smudging. We use a feather and we smudge, but this is going to take too long. So what I'm going to do is a quick prayer, and we pray to the north, and the north is Namamayu, and then that's where the Creator sits. Then we pray to the east, where my people sit, is Wampanoag. Then we pray to the south, is Soanayu, and then we pray to the west, is Papanayu. And we call our word for God is Katanet, and his son Jesus would be Wetux. Now, now let us all pray. Pokanoket, O Spirit, that gives us our breath, watch over us. O Spirit, that gives us our food, watch over us. O Spirit, that gives us our family, watch over us. O Spirit, that gives us our happiness, watch over us. O Spirit, that makes all living, watch over us. O Spirit, that makes us one with you, watch over us. You are the, O Spirit, you are the only one, watch over us. Aho.
Thank you so much, Barbara. What you remind us of is the oneness that we are all a part of, Great Spirit and the oneness of all. And I want to just sort of, underscore that when we're in the oneness and when we're holding gratitude for being part of the oneness, we take ourselves into those higher frequencies. And when we're in those higher frequencies, we experience insight and awarenesses that we can't do from this third dimensional world. And so as you've opened the space for us, and as you've opened us to our oneness, we are now able to interact with each other in a language that goes beyond words. And so while we are going to be using words, really the language of love and the deep sense of gratitude is what we're seeing into the space in this moment. You know, when we're in that oneness, we don't see our differences. We see the differences in the diversity that we bring because nature is all diverse. Nature is made of diversity. So diversity is so much a part of who we are. And yet we hold together in this oneness to celebrate those diversities, to understand those diversities, and to respect and honor what we bring in those diversities that creates the one. So this is the setting of what we're going to be exploring today as we go back 400 years. And I want to underscore that we have learned a great deal over these last 18 months as we've been living with COVID-19. The pandemic has taught us many things, one of which is how important family is. One another important is how connection with other humans is vital. And so we also understand the loss of many lives that have gone through this period and how we are dealing with that loss as well as that disconnection that can happen during a pandemic. And this is actually the very same sensation, same sentiment as what was occurring 400 years ago, when the Great Dying was taking place in the United States of America. I'm going to hand it over to Barbara and Andrew to speak on the Great Dying.
You mean Connie and Andrew?
No, Barbara and Andrew.
Barbara and Andrew. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
I thought I was getting mixed up.
Yeah.
I was.
So who wants to go first?
Andrew.
Okay, thanks, Barbara. So yeah, to set the context here, what happened before the Mayflower arrived in November of 1620? Several years prior, there was an epidemic, which we can legitimately describe as a pandemic, that had swept down the entire east coast of the entire northeast coast of the United States, starting up in Canada, in the present-day maritime states, coming as far as we can tell from the area of Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, that part, and Quebec, and swept down the coast, very much down the coast. In other words, it didn't go very far inland, and it got as far as Cape Cod, came down all those complex islands and inlets of Maine to present-day Massachusetts, and arrived at Patuxet. Patuxet being the original name and the name of the people who lived there of Plymouth, Massachusetts, where Connie and I are speaking to you from today. We are here in Plymouth, Massachusetts, right where these events unfolded. Looking out of the window here, I can see we'd have been able to see the Mayflower from the window of the house we're in right now. And this disease pandemic has been thought to be smallpox and various other diseases. And I researched this very deeply and concluded that it was none of those. There's half a dozen candidates. What it was plague, the bubonic plague. But I couldn't figure out how the bubonic plague could have traveled down the coast in that manner, because we all know that bubonic plague is spread by rats and fleas, or at least that was the case in medieval Europe. But there's another thing that happens. In a malnourished population, the disease itself mutates, just like our present coronavirus mutates. It mutates and becomes pneumonic. So instead of bubonic plague, it is pneumonic. And how do we know this? We just recently learned this, because in London, back in 1348 and 1349, 60% of Londoners died, an extraordinary death, 60% of the population of London. And how do we know that? Because in 2014, excavating under the city of London to build this huge transportation system that's going on right now, underground, they found a burial ground, a very carefully, every one of these skeletons had a name tag on it, and there it was. And these skeletons had rickets, and rickets is a sign of malnutrition. If your skeleton has rickets, you were malnourished. And under conditions of malnutrition, the disease mutates. Now, let's jump that disease from mid-1300s across the Atlantic on a French fur trading ship in the very early 1600s. And yes, the plague could have traveled across and landed up in Canada on a French fur trading vessel and come ashore with a rat that came down the ropes and infected some of the local people. Now, that could have done some damage, but it did much more damage than it would have done because the local people were malnourished. And they were malnourished because it was a war. That war today is known as the Tarleton's War. And Barbara knows about that. And most New England historians do not. They've never heard of it. So here's this war. And the war was between the people up north, the so-called Tarleton's. That's not a Native American name. It's not. It's a Basque name. The Basque fishermen called them that. And that name has come down to us. Those people up north were a raider culture who lived too far north to grow corn. Their growing season is too short. So they would come down and raid the southern coastline every fall, every harvest season. And a war broke out between the southern people and the northern people over literally competition for control of the French fur trade and typical humans. And so now here we have a war that is preventing the local coastal people from growing their crops. And therefore, it's not worth raiding people whose crops don't exist anymore. And secondly, the raiders who come down are starving because they've actually shot themselves in the foot because they've chased away the people who are growing their food that they depended on. So in the context of this war and this disease carried by warriors malnourished warriors in these birch bark canoes, which were much faster than the machoons that the local people down here got around in. That disease, I believe, spread all the way down the coast and wiped out 70 to 90% of the local population. That's my understanding of what sort of cleared the way for European settlement, horrible a thing as that may be to express. Without that, there's no way the Mayflower could have landed at Patuxent. Captain John Smith in 1614 estimated 2,000 warriors right here in Plymouth, Massachusetts, 2,000 Patuxent warriors. You're not going to come ashore and say, hi guys, we're here and we're going to set up a colony. It doesn't work that way. So Barbara, would you like to take it from there?
Well, yeah, what I know is when Squanto came back, he was captured and sent to England along with others. Squanto, Bano, and some others. When he came back, he saw all his ancestors, all his family bones laying on the ground because they didn't have time to bury them. And they were all bleached out from the sun. And he came to our people, came to our village and asked what happened. And what I was told is they told him that there was a great sickness that came and took all his people. He was actually, Squanto was Massachusetts Indian. We're all related, though. We're all in the same, we're all considered what they call Wampanoags, but we're all Pokanokets. So that's what I have on that. And he, from that great dying, we lost a lot of people too as well. So there wasn't a whole lot of us still left, but there was enough. And then we had trouble with other tribes too, over fishing rights, over land rights, over food. It was a bad time.
We still have land rights and fishing rights and all of that taking place. So the title of this, of Then and Now, I think if we listen into these stories of our history, we are also being reminded of our present. So thank you. Connie, you were going to tell us more from the Pilgrim aspect.
Yes, so when the Pilgrims arrived, they arrived in November. They came to Plymouth after their explorations in early December of a very cold winter. It was a mini ice age. It was many degrees below normal, and they couldn't get their boat, their shallop, up to the land. They had to wade from their shallop to the land and explore the land, the Cape, to find a proper bay and proper place for settlement, which they found in Patuxet, which is now Plymouth. And that first winter, half of their people died due to scurvy and perhaps unfamiliar organisms in the water. They weren't used to drinking water because in Europe, water wasn't potable. So they were used to drinking beer and drinking the water, who knows. But meanwhile, half of them died of the general sickness, they call it. And two of my ancestors were amongst those. And they were the parents of my direct ancestor, Priscilla Mullins, who was left as an orphan that spring. So here we have two peoples suffering from great loss. If we just go there for a minute, and we put ourselves in the position of these pilgrims, moms, dads, and kids who had come here for a new world, to establish a society built on freedom of conscience. This was radical. This was why they weren't welcome in England, because they didn't want to go to the Church of England. In fact, they refused and committed treason. So here, let's have a little compassion and look at these people, as you and me and our kids, standing up for something we believe in to a very extreme degree, and being motivated by a divine impulse for humanity. We're on this track, this evolutionary upward spiral, and there are way showers. There are people who take that step for us. And so I just want to bring that into people's hearts and minds, that these were humans. They're called pilgrims, and they've been just, their humanity has been taken away from them in this myth of the founding of this nation. And I just want you to go to their hearts and spirits, and also go to the hearts and spirits of the Pokanoket people, the native people, all the people of the Eastern Seaboard and in New England, and just go to their hearts, that they had lost so much of their people, 90% of their people. And so let's just go there and think about it now that we've suffered a pandemic, and we're in the middle of a pandemic, of what it does. It grabs us It takes our lives, our livelihoods, our way of being, and here we are in this place now. So let's just connect a little and go into gratitude, which is the theme of this time, of the gratitude of the pilgrims being greeted in the spring by a native who comes into their village in the making and says, "Welcome, Englishmen,"
In English.
in English. I mean, can you imagine how these people felt? Because they had already had the Nauset out on the Cape had attacked them a bit with some bows and arrows in the first encounter. So, but the pilgrims kept their heart and their spirit, and knowing that the native people were people they wanted to meet. And so they had taken means to connect with them that hadn't worked during the winter. And then here comes Samoset in to say, "Welcome, Englishmen," and brought them the Massasoit, who was an extraordinary leader. And we'll go into that further. Meanwhile, I'd just like to turn it over to Betty if she has any thoughts on this time.
I have to pass on this. I have more thoughts on some of the other things. But yeah, it's certainly a season for gratitude, and many Native people observe this time for thankfulness.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next.
I just wanted to say that I think I've not come across anyone else who's actually acknowledged the grief and the sorrow of those two groups who found each other 400 years ago this year. Just imagining the native people, and they must have been emotionally devastated. And here are the English, the Mayflower passengers coming ashore, losing half of their people. Obviously, they too were emotionally devastated. And the sheer gratitude of finding a friend, of finding friendship, of finding security, safety. The natives found a degree of safety with the English, who had weapons and things that made loud bangs and would chase the enemies away. And the English found friends in the form of the Massasoit and his people. And yeah, so I just want to say that that is a beautiful way to start Thanksgiving, the gratitude for that, for fellow humans and cooperation among people who are so different from one another.
And one thing I wanted to say is they didn't arrive in the US of A. We have to make a difference between America, the land that is Turtle Island and is known as America. That's the land. On that land came the United States of America and overlay onto that land. So we've been saying they arrived at the US of A, which is so radically not.
Right,
So
did not exist
so
yet for
I want to
another
just
150 years.
Yeah. So let's
So the time and place of what they came into needs to be honored. I also, though, want to just hold for a second the pilgrim intentionality around they were led here as by a higher order, and that they had committed in the land of King James treason. And so they had escaped to the Netherlands and then came over from there. And so what we're honoring is that both parties were being guided by a great spirit. So it's something about how the universal calling occurs and how we're guided to go where we need to go. And they were both in that moment, in that time, from a divine plan that they were holding sacred. And the human experience of that was horrendous. The spiritual journeying was what was holding them, and their human path was one that they had to clearly navigate. And so then when we start to talk about this moment of meeting, and Andrew, you so clearly, and Connie underscored this friendship that occurred, that they're in this moment that they had this sense of, we need each other. because keep in mind that in America, the different tribes were themselves at war with each other. So there's a whole host of different dynamics that are occurring on the land of America, as well as the Pilgrims arriving. I mean, history is highly complex in these moments of time, and we are gathering information daily in terms of what actually was occurring in those moments in time. But what we do know is that when they came and found each other, there was this emotion of gratitude, this emotion of we can share in our abundance of gathering together, that in this frequency, and they were being guided by a higher frequency to be there. So staying in that higher frequency of celebration, of finding each other, it's like designed destiny, that we are now here and we can come together in friendship to experience what we can do together, given all of the rampages that had happened on both sides of their experience. So when we think about the higher vision that also was guiding them, you know, that in fact they were seeking freedom. I mean, this is what they were seeking: liberty. They were seeking justice. They were seeking equality and abundance for all. I know that the Great Spirit would have used other language than the ones that the English were using, but the frequency of it were the same in the sense of what freedom and justice, equality and abundance looks like, feels like, energetically. It's unifying for all parties.
Yes,
so,
Lesley, may I add something to that?
Yes, please.
When the Pilgrims first came to Patuxet, they saw all these bones lying around. And Bradford refers to that as a kind of Golgotha. And it seems like intuitively he knew that this was a sacred space, because he ties it to the place of Christ's crucifixion in his head. And then as they begin to die, their bones are buried with the Patuxet's bones, and they mingle in the earth. And for Indians, this is very important. It's more than symbolic, because in most Native worldviews, the earth is the source of narrative. And they joined their narratives metaphorically and literally. And I think that's important to us today. And in my book, I show how their lives, the lives of the Pilgrims, totally replicated the lives of the Patuxets. And I think we need to understand this in a way to understand our ties to each other, particularly with Indians and non-Indians, because this is still a source of sorrow and disruption. Indians still today are not treated too terribly well. They're constantly put down, insulted, considered to be not quite human, patronized. And one of the things that's brought this out is the McGirt versus Oklahoma ruling, which has Oklahoma in a frenzy. Our governor is totally beside himself, and people are trying to get the Supreme Court to reverse this because it recognizes our sovereignty, McGirt does, and it recognizes the sacred words of the treaties, and it's going to change things somehow, we hope. And America will be better off when they understand that they need Native people. and that we're more alike than different.
Beautiful, Betty.
So powerfully said, Betty.
Yes, thank you.
And I think that that's why we're celebrating 400 years ago, as Andrew and Connie have named it, the first great synthesis of when, as you said, in the metabolic earth, their ancestors came together, and then the traditions of them continued together. And part of this is recognizing the high vibrational nature of both parties. I appreciate that there's all kinds of politics involved in how we look at history and what was taking place. But I think is what you're both bringing, all of you are bringing into this moment, is that the Massasoit, the great sachem, was a very high vibrational leader, and he's meeting very high vibrational travelers who have been told energetically to come to this place. And so you can imagine the meeting of these high vibrational individuals in their human form in coming together for this creation of freedom, this creation of liberty, this creation. So I think, Betty, what you're underscoring is that history has told a certain story. When we go back to these moments, we recognize how incredible this meeting was and what it had been driven to create by a higher level of order. And so I'm going to now ask us to go into this high vibration, this vibration which actually opened up 54 years of peace, which was unheard of in this area. They had been warring for so long, and yet when these two vibrations came together, the Pilgrims with the Pokanoket, this is when this blessing occurred, and they then were able to construct a 54-year peace agreement. So let's go into the high vibration of the Massasoit, the high vibe leader, and how he was instrumental in keeping the peace.
Yes, I would love to read a section from Edward Winslow's journal that was published in 1622. And it tells of Winslow's experiences. And we're going to be reading throughout this hour, if we have the time, bits from his journal, so that these are original source material. It's not somebody writing about an experience. It's somebody who was there writing it.
An eyewitness account.
An eyewitness account
Published
of
in
an
London in
experience.
1622. So it's a blessing that we still have these documents. They were published then, and we still have them.
Yeah, and they're accessible online, mayflowerhistory.com. You can go there and download PDFs of these little booklets. Good News from New England, and it's actually called, it's Mort's relation, but it's called A Relation of something or other. Anyway,
You'll find it.
let me read this about the Massasoit, because I want people to understand this vibration, that this man was extraordinary. He was different. Okay, so here we go. This is Edward Winslow writing. After this was on his way to honor the dying Massasoit, which he actually brought a conserve and actually saved him. This was in 1623. So how could it be published in 16? So actually,
Yeah,
I think
so
it was published in 1624.
Let's make sure we get those.
Yeah, I
dates
think it was
right. Yeah,
published in
I think it was published
1624.
1624.
Yeah, Mort's relation was earlier.
That's right.
Anyway.
1624.
Anyway, here it is. On the way, Hobomok, this was their guide who was living with them. Hobomok, manifesting a troubled spirit because he thought his Massasoit was dying or was dead, break forth into these speeches. Nin Wamasu Sagamus, etc. My loving sachem, many have I known, but never any like thee. And turning him to me, said, whilst I lived, I should never see his like amongst the Indians, saying he was no liar, He was not bloody and quell like other Indians. In anger and passion, he was soon reclaimed, easy to be reconciled towards such as had offended him, ruled in reason in such manner as he would not scorn the advice of mean men, and that he governed his men better with few strokes than others did with many, truly loving where he loved. Yea, he feared we had not a faithful friend left among the Indians, strewing how he oft times restrained their malice, etc., continuing a long speech with such signs of lamentation and unfeigned sorrow as it would have made the hardest heart relent. So this is a very important passage for the energy of the whole 54 years, the whole lifetime of the Massasoit and of William Bradford. This is when the peace reigned. And after that, the second generations and others, I mean, the huge influx of Puritans, these pilgrims were not pure, they were originally Puritans, they became the separatists because they separated from the church. In came the Puritans into Massachusetts Bay, 30,000 of them in 1630 and after. And then there was Connecticut and New York and the Dutch and the yada, yada, yada. I mean, over this 54 years, things were going on at a lower vibration. Okay, so here we have what an example of what a high vibration can do and what high vibration leaders can do. So
that's for us to really take note, right? In terms of how we lead from that vibrational space and how he was able to bring that connectivity to those that were landing and coming into this new space and maintaining this agreement of peace in a time where peace had not been evident. So this is 54 years of it was really a powerful recognition of history in that point. And so this was where we find the foundation of American democracy. And so then I believe this is when the Mayflower Compact was given in terms of so it was November the 11th, 1620, I believe was when that happened. Right. And Andrew, what was it about the Mayflower Compact? You were going to read some passage from it so that we understand what was that agreement.
So when the so-called pilgrims, they weren't called pilgrims back then, but the people who became known as the pilgrims, when they left Holland, their pastor, John Robinson, wrote them a letter, basically an instruction manual on what they were to do and how they were to do it, and from what vibratory state they were to do it, from the loving, it was all couched in Christian terms of God and so on, but it was very beautifully stated in that letter that they sailed across the Atlantic with. And when they landed, before they came ashore, they realized that there was the possibility of mutiny among these folks on the ship, and they had to have some way, some understanding of how they were going to govern themselves once they got ashore. So they had this conference and came up with this beautiful document. When you look at it from the perspective of democracy, it's a true a statement, a manifesto of democracy. And should we start with the little bit from?
Well, read a little Robinson? From the Robinson's letter, okay? Because Robinson didn't come with them. And here's his letter. Lastly, whereas you are to become a body politic, using amongst yourselves civil government, and are not furnished with any persons of special eminency above the rest, to be chosen by you into office of government. Let your wisdom and godliness appear, not only in choosing such persons as do entirely love and will diligently promote the common good, but also in yielding unto them all due honor and obedience in their lawful administrations, not beholding in them the ordinariness of their persons, but God's ordinance for your good. not being like unto the foolish multitude, who more honor the gay coat than either the virtuous mind of the man or the glorious ordinance of the land.
Of the Lord.
Of the Lord. The Lord is the land. Okay, so that is their
That
instruction.
was their instruction, out of which they expanded that to make it more specific to how they would govern themselves. And at every one of their meetings, they would read the Mayflower Compact as their basic instruction manual. This is what we've agreed to, friends. Let's stick with it.
So the Mayflower Compact states, having undertaken for the glory of God and advancements of the Christian faith and honor of our king and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia, do by these presents solemnly and mutually in the presence of God and one another, covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic for our better ordering and preservation and furtherance of the ends aforesaid, and by virtue hereof to enact, constitute, and frame such just and equal laws, ordinances, acts, constitutions, and offices from time to time as shall be thought most meet and convenient for the general good of the colony, unto which we promise all due submission and obedience. That little paragraph is the Mayflower Compact, the first document of from the Western mind of democracy. The native people had the Iroquois, in the Iroquois Confederacy, also had a democracy. They had a very,
Still do.
and still do, from the great law that was brought to them in the 1200s by the great peacemaker. So this is a parallel observation of the human desire to be free. And these are steps in the process of us becoming free. And that freedom has to do with our direct connection to the divine. And that's how the native people live, through the creator-based connection. And the pilgrims came with that same epiphany-based direct connection. We have the right to act according to our conscience, our direct connection. They saw that in the Bible. And that's what drove them to stand up to the King of England and the Church of England.
So the language is English, and so it's the civil body politic, very powerful term of equality in that. But I now want to welcome in Betty and Barbara in terms of with that arrival of that compact, what was it that was occurring on the side of the Pokanoket and the other indigenous nations there?
Me?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, there was a language problem. So yeah, we had to, it took a while to get that all straightened out. Covenant said it, I think Connie has it written, that when they at the first feast, when they were praying over the food, he recognized, he wasn't a fan of the English, by the way, but he recognized that their prayers and our prayers, the way they prayed and we prayed, were for the same thing. So that kind of started breaking the ice. Okay, we're on the same page here. So I think after that, and after when Winslow helped Massasoit when he was sick, all of that played a good part. We saw, okay, their intentions are good. We really gonna help each other. And at the first feast that the pilgrims were having, celebrating their crops, they were having a celebration the military, their military guns going off. We didn't like guns. We didn't want no part of guns. And so we sent 90 warriors to investigate, because we signed a treaty that we would protect them, they would protect us. So when the guns were going off, we didn't know what was going on, so we had to go and investigate. And when we saw it was a feast, they invited us. We brought our families. We brought food. My ancestor, grandfather Quadaquina, brought a deer hide full of popcorn. Showed them how to eat popcorn. So yeah, and it lasted 3 days. So that's a good thing. But there was a language problem. Still is a little bit, because it's a very hard language to understand.
It has a lot of politic in it. So so when every language reflects the historical origin of those peoples. And so it's as you say, when you go above the language of communication and into the language of prayer and into the vibration of shared gratitude and abundance, we transcend those barriers. But then we come back into our third dimension and with guns and such, it's a very different reality. So it's how we stay in that higher vibrational calling for us to see the unity that exists amongst us, even as we walk on this planet with somewhat lack of that unity and the discrimination practices that have occurred.
Right.
Yes.
They didn't at first, they didn't know that we believed in a God or had a God, or how many gods and all of that. But the Pokanokets believed, because we were visited, right? We were visited by Kiatan and Katana and the three sisters and Weetucks. He came with the three sisters and taught us how to pray, and three sisters taught the women how to plant the corn and stuff. So we had that already when you guys came, but they didn't know that until the language broke down and we could explain to them. And it all goes into play with John Eliot, the language, everybody teaching each other. And then with the praying Indians, a lot of us became praying Indians. We're a Christian tribe. We've always been a Christian tribe as long as I know. That's all. That's it. So,
Betty, what do you bring into this at this moment?
The first Thanksgiving or the first meeting?
Let's do both, the first meeting and then the first Thanksgiving.
Okay, the first meeting was a ceremonial affair. It covered a period of 7 days, from Samazot coming in and announcing that there would be a meeting. And prior to that, the natives had been watching the English carefully, and Bradford writes that the Indians were skulking about. They were frightened of the Indians because they had come to this country having heard all kinds of stories about barbaric people, savages. So they did not know what to expect. And they had had an encounter earlier that was not exactly pleasant. So they were frightened, yet they knew and they acknowledged that they were living on land that was not their own. And they knew that this had been a prior city or town. There were, it was clear there had been farms or planting grounds. So they were very worried. And then someone announced that the Massasoit wanted to meet, and they all start getting ready. And from the announcement until the actual meeting, 7 days passed. And things began to change. The English realized intuitively that this would be a ceremonial occasion. And these were people not really into ceremony. They were fleeing ceremony, particularly religious ceremony. So the next experience that they went to was royalty. The Massasoit was in their terms, a king. And so they thought they better do their best to to go along, you know. So Bradford records that before the meeting, they find this place and they put out a green carpet. Then they bring in cushions for people to sit on. Then they bring out their hard water, and they get all their important officials gathered to join this meeting. Okay, by the same token, Osamakan has gathered a large number of warriors, and they're all ritually dressed. Some of them have skins thrown on. They've all got face paint, including the Massasoit, and they come and there's a lot of hand kissing. The Pilgrims are kissing the Indians' hands. And I think this is hysterically funny because they would not be inclined to do that, but they're changing their normal mode of behavior to show appreciation for Native royalty is basically what they're doing. Now, during this meeting, Bradford writes, he gives a very good description of what Osamakan has on. And he says that behind his neck and running down his back was a pouch, and the pouch was full of tobacco. And he said the Massasoit used the tobacco, then he shared it with everybody else. And this is important because tobacco is a very significant part of Native ritual. And it's the thing that cleanses you, and it guarantees that you will not lie. And it lifts your words to heaven, to the Creator. And you dare not lie. Once you smoke that tobacco, it's kind of a promise making that you're going to adhere to what you say you're going to adhere to. So the first meeting, as we're calling it, is terribly important. It happened at a sacred space. And two men, Mayvar and Dix, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the title of the book, have spent years researching the Patuxent area. And they basically say it was something like a Stonehenge. And there are vision pits and the stone lines that radiate out from Patuxent. So they're in a highly sacred space. And the Massasoit is a supreme diplomat. He does not want trouble with these people. In fact, he wants to assimilate them, make them natives. Is one of the main reasons he probably agreed to have this meeting. He needed them. He needed them for numbers because the Great Sickness had killed off much of his population. And he also was cognizant of the fact that they were camped in a place that the Indians needed to use. It's like they've made a camp on the high altar of Canterbury Cathedral. And he's got to bring them into their way of thinking. But of course, he does not understand the religious obstinacy of the saints, as they are often designated. And also, as not an afterthought, but it isn't written in the agreement, but it happened. He installed two Panelists into the compound, Squanto or Tisquantum and Hobbamock. And these were very important spiritual people, special warriors that he probably really could not spare. So they each had jobs to do. Tisquantum's was to teach and lead, and Hobbamock's was to show various influences over the person he was joined with. And as it happened, Tisquantum was sent to live with Bradford. And I think it's important to understand that these two shared what was probably we would call a one-room cabin for years, several years. Hobbamock moved in with Miles Standish. And I think these two men were sent there for balance, to moderate things. You would have a person concerned with peace and goodwill, and another person that would moderate any militaristic tendencies that Standish had. And by this time, it was obvious to the observers what was going on. So I think Tisquantum's obligation was to Indianize the Pilgrims, bring them into the religious understanding of the place. And of course, he was not quite able to do that, but I'm certain he tried. I'm sure Hobbamock also tried. They did not make practicing Indians out of the Pilgrims, but they did change their way of thinking. And it's obvious from all the royal ostentation put forth at the first meeting. The Pilgrims are changing, whether they know it or not. And the Indians are trying to get along. They're trying to bring them into the fold and make them part of them. And sadly, it didn't work out, but it's the biggest shame, I guess, we have in this country, that it did not last, this getting along and absorbing each other's ways. Now, non-Native Americans do a lot of things, and they observe a lot of things that are actually Native, but they don't have a clue that that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the thing about when we are with one another in that sense of communion, we absorb one another without the distinctions of what those elements are. And then we keep evolving without really knowing how that alchemy was created inside of us as we navigate the earth. So you're reminding us, Betty, of just how much of these original moments, these original partnerships have underscored a way of being human that we are being called to recognize again today. And so I just want to, before we go into that, I want to just understand that there was a vibration of peace that was on this sacred space and the meetings of these people. And there was this treaty meeting that outlined the terms of the peace that did in fact last for 54 years. I just wonder, I think it's Andrew, you're going to read us part of that treaty meeting, the terms of the peace that sets off the 54 years.
Well, I'm just wondering if we can, because of the time, if we should let that go right now, because Betty expressed it so beautifully. I mean, she brought so much to us. That's the beauty of this gathering. And I hope we can do some more together here on Humanity Rising and bring forth the different perspectives and knowledge that different people have, because this is really just a beginning of a very important exploration. And so what I think we should do is address the 3-day harvest celebration that we call now the first Thanksgiving. And I just want to give people the idea of the timing. Okay, the treaty happened in the spring of 1621. The Pilgrims landed in the winter in December of 1620. Their first winter, they had the general sickness where half of the people died. And they had not met any Indians beyond seeing them in the woods around a bit, and that first encounter on Cape Cod. And so here we have the spring, and here is the Samoset come. It's not the Samoset, his name was Samoset. Samoset comes and says, "Welcome, Englishmen," in March of 1621. And this treaty followed in the spring. And Squanto came in to teach them how to plant Indian corn. These people were farmers. They knew the land, but they didn't know New England, and they didn't know Indian corn. And so Squanto came and taught them the Three Sisters process of corn, beans, and squash. He taught them how to gather eels by stomping on them. There was a lot of unfamiliar processes that the Pilgrims didn't have and know for this land. And so that occurred over the summer. They had the planting, and they had the friendship with Squanto and Hobomok in their village, living in their homes with them. And so here we come on the harvest in the fall of 1621. And Barbara referred to that as they shot off their muskets, they had to exercise their guns, their matchlock guns. So they did that on a monthly basis. So this had occurred during the summer. It had occurred because they had to keep them active. And I just talked to somebody recently who told me, yes, they did it on a monthly basis. So they exercised their arms, and here come the native people, thinking, oh, is this a problem or what's up? And here they have the harvest. So what would be good for us to read is the document, the small paragraph that has come down to us from Edward Winslow about this 3-day celebration, this 3-day harvest celebration. And people can take that into Thanksgiving tomorrow and just ponder that amazing coming together of gratitude for abundance. The Indians brought 5 deer. The Pilgrims had the food to share. And there were only 50 people of the Pilgrims left. How many women, Andrew?
It was 4 adult women.
4 adult women.
14 men.
14 men.
And 34 children.
And 34 children.
Think about that.
Okay, we're at this gathering. And so here comes Massasoit with the 90 warriors, but also with their families, as Barbara has said. But what I want to do is read this paragraph that is the only extant written knowledge of that time. And here it is. Let's see.
Where's it hiding?
Here is it hiding. Okay. So here we go. Our harvest being gotten in, our governor sent 4 men on fowling. so that we might, after a special manner, rejoice together after we had gathered the fruit of our labors. They 4 in one day killed as much fowl as, with a little help beside, served the company almost a week. At which time, amongst other recreations, we exercised our arms, many of the Indians coming amongst us, and among the rest, their greatest king, Massasoit, with some 90 men, whom for 3 days we entertained and feasted. And they went out and killed 5 deer, which they brought to the plantation and bestowed on our governor and upon the captain and others. So that's a little paragraph, but I want to read what follows. This is very important, what follows. And although it be not always so plentiful as it was at this time with us, yet by the goodness of God, we are so far from want that we often wish you partakers of our plenty, as he's writing to the people in England. Edward Winslow is telling them what it's like.
Actually interested in more people coming over. Please come. We need more members.
Okay, so here we go. We have found the Indians very faithful in their covenant of peace with us, very loving and ready to pleasure us. We often go to them and they come to us. Some of us have been 50 miles by land in the country with them. The occasions and relations whereof you shall understand by our general and more full declaration of such things as are worth the noting. Yea, it hath pleased God so to possess the Indians with a fear of us and a love unto us, that not only the greatest king amongst them called Massasoit, but also all the princes and peoples round about us have either made suit unto us or been glad of any occasion to make peace with us, so that 7 of them at once have sent their messengers to us to that end, yea, and which we never saw
An
an isle at sea.
An island, Martha's Vineyard.
Which we never saw, hath also, together with the former, yielded willingly to be under the protection and subjects of our sovereign Lord King James, so that there is now great peace amongst the Indians themselves, which was not formerly, neither would have been but for us. And we, for our parts, walk as peaceably and safely in the wood as in the highways in England. We entertain them familiarly in our houses, and they as friendly, bestowing their venison on us. So that's just a beautiful statement of what was going on between these people. It's astounding, an exception to the human condition then and now, because what was going on around them in America, the Massachusetts Bay Colony, everything else, and what was going on in Europe, this low frequency behaviors, there's high frequency vision. So now it's up to each of us to align with our hearts and feed that high frequency, so that as a collective, we can move into a higher frequency and leave behind the behaviors and attitudes of the lower frequency, which I feel the root cause is the scientific paradigm, but we won't go there. The reductionist
That's another
paradigm,
program. That's
another
another
program. Let's we won't go there right now.
I do want to though call in Barbara and Betty on so the high frequency was maintained for 54 years. That peace, that universal peace that was there. And then the vibrations dropped, and we start to see by 1675 war replacing diplomacy. And so what was actually happening that we can pay attention to, how that drop in frequency then affected the history that then followed, and where we in many ways find ourselves today.
Me?
Yes, please, Barbara.
Okay, so what happened was Poe Metacom saw that things, this generation, the second generation, things were starting to change. And he saw that he was losing his land, he was losing his people. So he went to Mount Wachusett to meet, well, first he met with Passaconaway, a New Hampshire medicine person, chief. And Passaconaway said, if you stand up to the English, you're going to be rooted out of your land. You're going to lose, in other words. So then with that, him and Anawan was one of his principal Phoenici warriors. Him and Anawan took a trek to Mount Wachusett. And when they went to Mount Wachusett, they met with a Nipmuc medicine man who had a turtle, an ancient turtle that he used for counseling. So they asked the turtle, should we go to war? Poe Metacom asked the turtle. Turtle was asleep. His head was in his shell. He didn't respond to Poe Metacom. But when Anawan approached the turtle came out, his head came out of the shell, bit at Anawan, and the medicine man says, you have your answer. Your people will be rooted off the face of the earth, and they will lose, unfortunately, they will lose their customs, they will lose their ceremonies, they will lose everything. And that was the start of, that was part of the start of the war. And also being native and being human, you know, we do things. He had a couple of warriors that went against him, and they were murdered. He had them murdered for what they were doing against him. So that started that. So one thing led to another. It just got crazy after that. So that's what happened. That was the beginning of the war. The second generation didn't understand what the first generation was all about. Evidently, they didn't see the importance of the friendship with each other. You know, it just got, this is my land. Nope, this is my land. I'm here. This is my stuff. This is yours. And then we intermarried with each other. It just got really, really, really crazy. But here we are today. You know, here I sit, Stephen Hopkins on one arm, Massasoit on the other. Half of my heart is one and the other half is the other. I favor the native part because that's where my heart is. I'm sorry to say, but that's where I was led in vision. I've had visions like you've had visions. And my vision took me to my people. My vision told me who I am, showed me who I am and what to do. And today I'm speaking for my people. They are a loving people. They love people. And we want to live in peace,
Yes,
in harmony, in love. That's what we want to do. But also the truth has got to come out about the past that happened. So
yes, it absolutely does. And
you're not taught the truth in school. You know, you're not taught the truth in school. So this is the perfect time.
for us to know.
And then what we're going through as a country too. You know, we don't want to lose our country to some something that we don't understand, you know? So this is the time, and I believe that my vision that I've had more than one, the visions that I've had and the counsel that I've had from the entities that come to me and share their wisdom with me and what's going on. And not only that, the elders and the people, the medicine people that took me under their wing and taught me things and showed me things. You know, this is all part of a plan. And I believe even back then it was set up by the Creator back then. So we would all learn. We had to go through this bad. We had to go through the good. We had to go through what we had to go through to be in the now today, to be able to see what not everybody sees it though. That's the sad
It's
part.
true. It's true. We don't all see it.
To see what's happening now and why people are being brought together. There's people going to come into our family that are white, that aren't necessarily native, but they have gifts. They were sent to us. That's the prophecy. And not just my tribe, all the tribes, all the people, it's going to come together. But we're going to go through some bad stuff first.
We are. We are.
Some more. Yeah.
And so I'm very aware of time in this moment. And I just want to bring in Betty for a moment. Betty, what is it about this time in history that, you know, back in 1675, when war overrode peace, that we can bring into today's understanding of how we find peace?
I'm not sure how we're finding peace. That escapes me. I'm sorry. But some of the things leading up to the dissolution were the tremendous numbers of Europeans coming to this country. And of course, they came with their own mindset and they wanted land. I mean, they were greedy for land and they would do anything to get it. Now, in my heart, I always side with Plymouth. That's the place I've studied and spent much of my intellectual energies. I think they were not quite so greedy, but as a matter of fact, they were. Bradford laments it, that they felt they needed more land and they began leaving what he called the mother colony and moving out to other places, taking land and increasing their farms. And that meant increasing their productivity and their incomes. Now, the worst players were the Puritans who came into Boston, and they made absolutely no attempt to be peaceful, but they immediately started putting themselves out there in such a way that they gave the impression they wanted to be absolute rulers, and they began taking land. And they killed anybody that opposed them. And of course, they're responsible for what we call the Pequot Massacre, where they wiped out roughly 700 Pequots and then sent others into slavery. They ended up in Bermuda, in Barbados. It was horrible the way they acted. So the second generation of leaders, Metacom and Wamsutta, they were facing not a good man like Bradford, but a less than good man, Josiah Winslow, who was Edward Winslow's son. And this guy had a completely different mindset. I think he was more like the Puritans and wanted economic advantage. Then the the major thing I think that convinced Metacom to go to war was the death of his brother. The rumor was that the English had poisoned Wamsutta, and that was the end of Metacom's patience. And he could see from the numbers, and I'm sure he was conversant with other tribal people, that it was happening everywhere, all up and down the coast. And something had to be done. And he and his group, I think mostly largely Narragansetts, were almost successful. They wiped out a bunch of English. And the English had to call for help from the mother country. And that's probably what turned the tide, was soldiers coming in from England to help the colonists defend themselves. And the only thing I can really say about this is it's a shame. The good thing is we were given a paradigm of how to behave. And we need to somehow get back to that paradigm. We need leaders like Bradford, Carver, Winslow, people of goodwill, as was the Massasoit.
Yes.
We just need people of goodwill. And we don't seem to have that right now. And I must admit, I don't know how we get there, but we need to keep reminding people of this original story, because this is how it should be.
So we have it in our bloodline. We have it in our history. We have it in our awareness and frequency of that this was a time, and that we can call it back in. And so I just want to give each of you one sentence to what is your wish for this Thanksgiving, as we sit at the table and celebrate all that is and all that we share, and the friendship and gratitude we have for one another. What is each of your wishes that we are sending out in preparation of Thanksgiving tomorrow? I'm going to start with you, Barbara.
I guess I'm sorry, my husband handed me a note, so I had to read it. I'm grateful, and we all should be grateful for what we have. And we should be grateful for one another, because now we do share. We're coming back together to some extent. I've met some wonderful, great people that are willing to help us. The university, Roger Williams University, has reached out to us, the Pokanokets. They dedicated a room to us. I'm so grateful that, and they want to help us to get home, because back then, after when the war was going on, if you were a Pokanoket, they could kill you. So we had to hide. I was told by my grandmother, don't tell anybody who you are. To make sure you're in when the street light comes on, because they'll steal you. You know, they were taking kids. They were stealing kids and stuff. Don't tell them who you are. Be quiet and stuff like that. So it's not like that today. And I really believe that we're gonna be okay. We're all gonna come together at some point. I really believe it.
Thank you. Betty, what's your message?
I would pray for unity. If it starts with unity of family, so many families are broken for one reason or another. I hope they can use Thanksgiving as a time to unite again, to get on the same page, so to speak. I hope our country can come together and do the same thing. And remember the first example that was set for us, and try somehow to emulate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Andrew.
Thank you for that, Betty. Yeah, in this terribly divided moment in American history, 2021, I think the best thing we can do is to remember and to be aware that there was a time 400 years ago that the most unlikely of people were able to come together and overcome their differences. They had language differences, they was extraordinarily different from one another. And yet the common ground, they knew that peace and friendship between the groups was the only way forward. And that is the only way forward for this country right now. Let's remember that at tomorrow's feast.
Thank you. Connie.
Yes, and I pray for the opening of the heart of all people and all of creation. In my understanding, all of creation is awaiting the love that's going to come forth from the opening of our heart, because we're going to shift the frequency for all of creation. And I feel, and I saw 30 years ago, that the indigenous heart, the indigenous spirit, is going to heal the heart of humanity. So I just am so thankful for Betty and Barbara for coming forth from your hearts with a balanced look at our past and inspiring us to go forward into a new future, what I call the third great synthesis. Because the first synthesis came here in Plymouth. The second came when the aspects of the great law of the Iroquois came into our Constitution. The Iroquois chiefs advised the framers of a Constitution. The second great synthesis, we've birthed something when we've come together. And now we're in the time of the third great synthesis now. So I just pray that open heart can come forth as a result of cleansing all these divisive opinions and feelings that are surfacing now for this process to go forward. And I just pray for the healing of the indigenous heart so that the indigenous people can come forth from this vibration of love and universal oneness and sacredness of all life that I was shown over the 30 years I've spent with visionary elders. Thank you.
And before we go to the wrap up with Barbara, your song, I just want to say that my wish is that we listen to the truth. And I don't think we can move into that high vibration unless we sit in the vibration of the path that got us to this point and understand deeply the wounds and the carnage and the assimilation and the dominance that have eradicated the peace that was created in 1621. Unless we honor the depth of that truth, it is simply whitewash. And we have the higher vibration can come to us, but it has to come, in my mind, this is my view, through a deep appreciation of the truth. So I want to thank you for sharing that with us today. And it's a doorway into something. I'm sorry that we've gone so long, but I just didn't want to stop. This is such beautiful storytelling and truth telling that needed to be said on this day as we get ready for Thanksgiving tomorrow. So my deepest gratitude to each and every one of you, Betty, Andrew, Connie, and now Barbara's going to finish us off and close our circle with a song.
I'm going to sing it in our language, and then I'm going to sing it, and then I'll sing it in English. Tabatni wuchi ake kesa. Tabatni wuchi nipi kwaza kwanash. Tabatni wuchi meta kesa. Kesa to botany. Hey, hey, hey. Thank you for the earth and sky. Thank you for the water and the rocks. Thank you for the trees and just for today. Great Spirit, I thank you. Great Spirit, I thank you. Hey, 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 aho.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I want to deeply say thank you to all of you and remind everyone that there is the after chat that is linked in the chat for those to share further the blessings that you've brought to us today. And tomorrow, please come back for Anne Baring's celebration of her 90th birthday. That is said to be another celebration of our time. So Godspeed, great one, great love. Let's stay in that frequency with our ancestors and those to come after us.
Botany.
Aho.
Wado.
Okay.
Great job.
Mhm.